taught during the summer last year. I chose not to take any classes and snagged a job at a gas station adjacent to my college campus. School had lost its appeal, and I figured earning some money during my off time wouldn't hurt. The gas station was my first choice for work, and oddly enough, it turned out to be the last place I applied before they hired me on the spot. They had one stipulation: the night shift. Running from 11 p.m. to 7 o'clock a.m. it would mess with my sleep schedule, but I thought I'd give it a shot. Surprisingly, most nights weren't too bad. The initial hours were busy, followed by a quiet spell until around 5 o'clock a.m., allowing me to tidy up and prepare for the morning rush. Occasionally, odd or troublesome customers strolled in, but nothing went too far off the rails until it did. It was a rather slow Thursday night. My co-worker left around midnight, leaving me alone. Time flew, and it was almost 2 o'clock a.m. when a man walked in, setting off alarms in my gut. He had a shaved head adorned with strange tattoos, giving off a vibe I didn't like. He parked his beat-up lifted truck in the handicap spot, but I didn't confront him. However, things took a turn when he realized he couldn't buy beer due to the local alcohol purchase law between 2 o'clock a.m. and 6 o'clock a.m. Politely explaining the law led to his agitation. Hurling slurs at me and belittling my efforts, he pleaded, wanting an exception since he arrived just before 2 o'clock. Against my better judgment, I caved and sold him the beer. As he left, relief washed over me momentarily until he cracked open a beer from his truck. My unease grew as more men with shaved heads and tattoos joined him, loitering, drinking, and smoking just outside. I knew I had to intervene, but fear held me back. Their smirks and challenging stares made me feel helpless. When the man returned, even drunker, and demanded another case of beer, I felt cornered. His threatening tone left me trembling. I complied out of fear for my safety, watching in distress as they cheered and littered the area with empty cans. Feeling trapped, I locked the door and called the police, praying for a swift resolution. Thankfully, a cruiser arrived, dispersing the group without much commotion. I feared the worst, but was relieved when the officer ensured their departure. Still, the terror lingered, prompting my resignation the next day. I couldn't bear the thought of facing those menacing individuals. Again, the town's streets felt ominous, fearing any chance encounter might reignite that night's horror. These individuals and their ilk haunted my thoughts, a constant reminder of the sinister shadows lurking in my town's corners. The experience at the gas station had left an indelible mark on me. The fear of encountering those men again haunted my thoughts daily. Quitting was a relief, yet the unease persisted. I avoided late-night outings, fearing I might cross paths with them. Months passed, and the dread slowly eased, but the memory lingered like a dark cloud. I found work elsewhere, but the trauma of that night stayed with me. Every time I spotted someone with tattoos or a shaved head, my heart skipped a beat, and I'd quicken my pace, hoping to avoid any confrontation. Despite my efforts to move on, the lingering paranoia gnawed at me. The town held secrets and dangers I never knew existed. I couldn't shake the feeling that those individuals were just a fraction of a larger, menacing presence lurking within the community's shadows. Each day was a reminder of the thin line between safety and vulnerability, a lesson learned in that one harrowing night at the gas station. I used to work as a night clerk in a downtown condominium. The association had a lot of security concerns due to the building's construction in the late 60s. Both levels of the parking garage were accessible from street level, creating many possible entry points, often in blind spots of the security camera system. As a result, I had to make 2 rounds around the entire building during my shift to ensure no non-residents had entered. The most significant issue we faced was occasional carjackings, but more commonly, homeless people found their way into the garage seeking shelter. It was always tough kicking them out onto the street, but it was part of the job. After a few months, I knew all the hiding spots. The building, old and renovated multiple times, had numerous nooks and crannies, sealed-off rooms, and stairs that led nowhere. The creepiest spot was a peculiar and potentially dangerous dead-end hallway located on the first floor of the garage. It led to a corridor directly under the ramp to the second level. It was about 3 feet wide, stretching around 20–30 feet. But it served no purpose and ended with a large water pipe and valve. What made it perilous was the door's lock, a sliding bolt latch on the outside with no means of unlocking it from the inside. Despite my concerns, management was aware of the spot, but unwilling to take action. I was required to check it every night, but never dared to step inside. Then, one night, my worst fear came true. Around 3:00 a.m. during my rounds, I heard a door slam and found the dead-end hallway door wide open. I cautiously approached and saw an empty bottle inside, but no one else was there. As I moved to pick up the bottle, the door suddenly slammed shut. Panic surged as I realized I was locked inside. Despite my efforts to call for help, there was no phone signal due to the building structure. I felt trapped, unable to escape. Car alarms echoed in the garage, suggesting someone was breaking in. Minutes later, the alarms ceased, leaving an eerie silence. Stuck and helpless, I banged on the door, shouting for assistance. But no one came. Time passed, and hope dwindled. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to get the attention of an early riser, who freed me. However, the damage was done. Several cars had been broken into, and I was dismissed from my job due to the security breach. The culprit remained unidentified. Despite the security cameras, it was a harsh reminder of our vulnerability, even on an ordinary Wednesday night. I reached out to the early riser who freed me, and quickly called the authorities. The break-ins and the terrifying ordeal were reported. But despite investigations and footage from the security cameras, the culprit remained elusive. The incident left a haunting impact on me. Despite my diligence, I lost my job, and the sense of vulnerability lingered. The building's security flaws, combined with management's indifference, created a perfect storm for the events that unfolded. Months passed, and the lingering fear persisted. It was a stark reminder that our safety is often fragile, even in seemingly secure environments. I sought new opportunities elsewhere, hoping to leave behind the unsettling memories of that fateful night in the downtown condominium. Before I moved out of my hometown, I was working as a waiter at a 24/7 diner. I chose to work the third shift because I had the best hourly pay and brought in pretty good tips. Due to us being the only 24/7 diner in the entire town, it took me about a year to save up enough money, though, to rent a place in the city and get out of the middle of nowhere. But that time, I saw quite a few things that still stick with me to this day. By and large, most of the customers I had were truckers and other random people traveling on the interstate. Through the middle of the night, the town was just a stopover point, not a destination, as much. The locals consisted of farmers and ranchers from the surrounding area and anyone else like me who worked in the fast food and hotel chains clustered around the interstate exit. The final and yet the most characteristic residents of that depressing cesspit of a town were the vagrants, hitchhikers, tweakers, and destitute opportunists that had been stranded with us. They could be stuck there, from anywhere to a few days to several years, clinging to the parking lots and awnings that were the only meager shelter, for dozens of miles in any direction, panhandling for whatever they could until they got lucky enough to get a ride to somewhere else. Really, the only stressful part of my job was dealing with these people. In the beginning, I tried to be empathetic. After all, they are human. However, It didn't take long to end up like my usual co-worker, the cook that had been there for 15 years and had seen just about everything. His name was Carl, and the only thing separating him from them was a steady position at the grill. Nobody ever got a chair thrown at them as far as I know, but Carl was prone to throwing turners and other utensils at anyone who got on his bad side. I usually followed his lead based on his body language. He knew who was trouble and who wasn't. However, even with Carl as a reliable backup, things sometimes got out of hand. There was this one night that I'll never forget. I don't remember what day of the week it was, but all I know was that it had been unusually slow that night. It was around 4 o'clock in the morning when this guy walked in, and even I knew something was not right about him. He was wearing soiled clothes and a completely torn up jacket, covered head to toe in dust, and was in a completely panicked state of mind. The weird thing was that he said nothing as he ran past us, clutching his right arm to his chest and immediately locking himself in the bathroom. Carl and I rolled our eyes at the same time. Here we go again, we thought. Although I think we both had a feeling this wasn't a regular hobo bathroom emergency or a tweaker looking for a private place to do their thing. That's when I asked Carl, "Doesn't he kind of look familiar?" He brushed it off at first, but then after a short conversation, we realized that he had been inside about 2 hours ago, desperately asking all the customers for rides until eventually, we had to kick him out for being a disturbance. It seemed he obviously hadn't had any luck on getting a ride, but something else had happened to him too. I became worried. If that guy needed help, it would be a while before an ambulance could get to him and even longer for them to take him to a hospital. Carl told me to take care of it, so I ran the check for the only customer we had in the store at the time and got them on their way. When I took the bathroom keys and went to check on our stranger in distress, I knocked on the door pretty loud and asked if everything was okay. There was a pause. Then finally, a distraught voice answered me. "I think I'm really hurt. I just need a ride." Suddenly, I knew something was seriously wrong. The sound of his voice made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I fumbled with the key ring as I told him I was about to open the door. "Sir, if you need help, I have to come in there," I shouted. "No," the stranger screamed, "you have to come get me." I stopped for a second, confused. But then I snapped out of it and shoved the key in the lock and turned it. Then opened the door to a terrifying sight. The bathroom was empty, completely empty. No injured man, no blood, no dust, just nothing. It was as clean as it had been since I last cleaned it, as if nobody had been in there at all. In fact, it even looked cleaner than that. "What's going on in there?" Carl shouted from the kitchen. I was just at a loss. I let the bathroom door close and I stepped back. I looked at Carl and told him the truth. "There's nobody in there," I said. "Don't give me that," Carl shouted. "See for yourself." I told him, and he did. He stormed over and barged through the bathroom door. I saw him go blank, just like I did when he saw the impossible absence of a person. He turned around and looked inside the women's room too. But again, nothing. Nobody. In raw disbelief, we gathered ourselves behind the counter. We interrogated each other uselessly, thinking one of us must have let him slip by unnoticed. However, we both knew we had been on high alert since the second he came in. There was no way neither of us would have not noticed him leaving within a fraction of a second. Our conversation ended as we both saw the same thing. Out of the corner of our eyes, the stranger was somehow outside, looking at us through the window. He still had his right arm stuffed out of sight, but now, as we got more of an eyeful of his face than we ever wanted to, we saw that wasn't his only problem. His face was bloody, like he'd been hit with a brick. His nose was broken into, and his lip was split and missing a piece, showing us his cracked and missing teeth. One of his eyes seemed completely swollen over, but the one that was open was gushing blood. Carl and I didn't move a muscle. We didn't even breathe for a second. after a few horrible seconds of realizing what was happening. I finally thought to call 911, but as soon as the idea occurred to me, the man started to move. He turned to the side and started to limp across the big front window. We watched him in silence. He made it all the way to the corner of the window where it wrapped around to the other side. "What the hell?" I whispered, only for Carl to quickly shush me. It was at that moment I saw he had gone pale and wide-eyed, which only terrified me even more. Something about this man had gotten through Carl's defenses, and that meant we were not prepared. Before we could say anything else, we heard a crash from the back room. We both ran inside and searched for the source of the noise. It was coming from the walk-in freezer. Somebody was tearing things up and freaking out. Carl ran up there and threw open the door. And there he was, that guy. He had ripped open a box of burger patties and was clutching a handful of meat, pressing it to his right arm like an ice pack. When he saw us, he froze. The patties dropped from his hand and revealed the condition of his arm. His hand was stuck in a thumbs-up position, but his wrist had been snapped clean off, and his hand was dangling from the rest of his arm by a thread of skin. After a terrifying moment of deer-in-headlight stares, the stranger bolted from the freezer, crashing through both me and Carl. He sprinted outside, screaming. Before we had a chance to react, I stumbled to my feet as Carl ran out to the dining area and locked the front doors and switched off all the lights. Then he pushed me back into the back room and started yelling at me. "How could you leave the back door unlocked?" he yelled. "No. Look, it's still locked." I pointed to the back door, and sure enough, it was locked. Now absolutely nothing was making sense, but we gave up on trying to decipher it for the rest of the night, until the sun came up and the morning crew came in. We kept the doors locked and stayed out of sight. When we were finally freed from our nightmare of a shift and set out into the world, we noticed the train of police and paramedics on the freeway right outside of town. We asked around only to find out that a man had been killed in a hit-and-run right there at the off-ramp, not even 1,000 feet from the Waffle House. He died sometime after midnight, but his body laid on the shoulder undiscovered until daylight. His corpse was mangled, but his thumb was still sticking straight up from trying to hitch a ride. Of course, by the afternoon, they had scraped him off the pavement and washed away his blood until the spot in which he died was cleaner than I'd ever seen. Years ago, I worked as a barista at a locally owned coffee shop, a popular venue for local artists and musicians. Even then, most of its business came during evening open mix, staying open until 2 a.m. However, back then, pre-2020, it was open 24/7 from Thursday to Sunday. The graveyard shift was disliked by everyone. Easy hours, but abysmal tips, and the shop stood alone for miles. Keeping less than $50 in the drawer was a rule for safety reasons. I often had a male friend, Nick, hang out with me during overnight shifts, making it bearable. We'd chat when things slowed down. Although we were close, it was always platonic. Nick had an extensive knowledge of the shop, and we joked that he might as well work there. I never thought there would be bad blood between us, unless there was an awkward encounter. Then, one slow Saturday night in summer 2019, I was working the last overnight shift. Nick had missed the last two nights due to a family wedding. A friend was too tired to fill in, leaving me anxious but managing. By 3 a.m., I had only made $10 in tips, and the shop was empty except for me. As I brewed coffee, I glimpsed a figure outside the front window, but when I looked, no one was there. Minutes later, someone came through the front door as I filled the mop bucket in the back. I called out, but nobody answered. I assumed they were in the bathroom and began mopping behind the counter. A strange feeling crept over me, but I couldn't pinpoint it. I checked the drawer and the bathroom. A man was inside. Uneasy, I continued mopping. When the man exited the bathroom, it was Nick. I felt relief but questioned why he was there. His reason was that he just returned from the wedding and wanted to say hello. Grateful for the company, I offered him anything on the house and began making coffee. Suddenly, Nick's expression changed, and he revealed a knife. Fear surged through me as he spoke menacingly. Panicked, I hit him with a panini press, fled to my car, and called the police. Nick tried to block my escape but eventually left. When the police arrived, there was no sign of Nick. Despite giving a detailed account, due to legal complications and Nick's disappearance, I chose not to press charges. The coffee shop ceased its overnight operations. I continued working there for a while, but eventually, I moved on. Nick's vanishing remains a mystery, and the incident still haunts me. Nick's disappearance after that night added to the mystery. I couldn't shake off the unease even after leaving the job. There were no leads, no trace of him. The incident lingered as an unresolved, haunting memory. I made peace with my decision not to pursue legal action. The fear of what Nick had planned haunted me, but the gratitude for escaping that night outweighed everything else. I moved on, trying to put the horrifying episode behind me. The coffee shop no longer stayed open overnight, and I found a new job, but the trauma lingered. Sometimes, I'd glimpse someone in a crowd, a figure resembling Nick, and the old fear would surge back, reminding me of that terrifying night. Despite it all, life went on. Yet, the memory of that night remained etched in my mind, a chilling reminder of how quickly safety and trust could shatter. I've always been a night owl, naturally gravitating towards night shifts. I'm not the most adept at working alongside others, whether they're colleagues or not. This led me to choose a solitary job, nighttime janitor at the local school district right after high school. 4 years. Schools had mandated nightly cleaning as part of health codes. Recently, it gained more prominence. My first gig was at a sizable K-12 during the night shift. It was just me and another person dividing the school down the middle. I relished the minimal interaction with co-workers. Every night, it's a routine mopping or vacuuming all floors, disinfecting every desk, table, and door handle, and meticulously cleaning every toilet, urinal, and sink. It's an 8-hour endeavor, and I remain solitary throughout. I prefer it that way. Most of my co-workers are women, and they prefer no interaction with me either. People often assume that the toughest part is cleaning up after the students' messes. Well, they might be right, to an extent, but personally, I'd rather handle 10 clogged toilets every single night than work directly with another human being all day, especially a bunch of minors. There's an incident I narrate to justify that statement. It was the night after Halloween. I arrived for my usual 8 to 5 shift and got started without exchanging greetings with my colleague. We worked from opposite ends and met in the middle, minimizing interaction. The first hour was routine, except for one oddity. I keep my music low, but I could sense sounds beyond my headphones. Usually, the faculty leaves by 8 o'clock, but sometimes, someone stays late. Unable to decipher through my music, I ignored it. Later, while changing the mop bucket's water, I spotted a fallen wet floor sign. I had to reset it and redo the mopped area knowing. When I reached the spot, another detail caught my eye. There were additional footprints in the water, resembling a child's. I followed these tracks, redoing the entire hallway. The tracks led to the stairs, then disappeared on the second floor. I heard faint movement and laughter, like a horror movie. Annoyance replaced fear. However, things escalated when I found the mop bucket knocked over, creating a massive mess. Fuming, I cleaned it and redid the affected area, shortening my lunch break. Angry and deliberating my options, I considered reporting to the school or even the police, but it seemed futile. The real drama erupted around 11 o'clock when the school lights abruptly shut off, replaced by dim emergency lights with a reddish hue. Concerned, I approached the electrical room. Suddenly, a piercing scream, presumably from my colleague, echoed. Startled, I raced toward the source. A loud door slam made me fear intruders. I managed to reach the electrical room, finding the door slightly ajar. A figure loomed in the darkness, unsettling. Fearing the worst, I attempted to use my phone for light. But before I could, the figure slammed the door shut, sending me stumbling back. I sprinted to the other side of the school to check on my colleague. Her mop bucket was there, but she wasn't. In the dimness, the echo of a child's laughter sent chills down my spine. Armed only with a mop, I faced the hallway, trembling. Suddenly, a whispered hello startled me, reacting on instinct. I jabbed the mop handle into the person's chest, causing a grunt and retching. As the figure started crying, I recognized a student, realizing my potential job jeopardy for the impulsive reaction. But as the truth emerged, it was a prank. Two twins and their younger sibling hiding in unused lockers after school. They avoided expulsion, primarily due to their remorse. I retained my job, but was relocated. This solidified my aversion to people, especially children.